My name is Marin Doyle, and I'm 28 years old. On the second day of my daughter's life, I stood on the driveway of my in-laws' colonial in Westfield, New Jersey, holding my newborn against my chest and 2 suitcases somebody else had packed for me. Behind that white front door, my mother-in-law had just told me there was no room in her house for a wife who couldn't hold her weight. My husband watched from the upstairs window. He didn't open it. He didn't come down. He let the glass stay between us. I want to tell you I screamed or pounded on that door or called a cab and cried the whole ride. I didn't. I stood there in the cold October air doing the thing I've done since I was 19. I calculated. Not out loud, in my head, the way I balance a client's books before I ever open the software. And while I was calculating, a black Volvo pulled into the driveway, and my mother got out of it with a manila folder under her arm and an expression I had never seen on her face before. Whatever was in that folder was about to hit the Whitfield family like a car crash in slow motion. Nobody saw it coming, least of all me. If you're new here, this is where I tell the story exactly how it happened. No filter, no softening it for anyone's comfort. If stories about marriage, money, and the people who think family is something you have to earn stay a while, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want to hear how this ends. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without my mother. I grew up in a rented duplex in Elizabeth, New Jersey with my mother, Carol Doyle, who spent 26 years as a claims adjuster for an insurance company downtown. My father left when I was 4. What I remember of him is a leather jacket and the smell of cheap cologne. And honestly, the jacket might just be from a photo my mother never threw away. She never badmouthed him. She never chased him either. That tells you most of what you need to know about Carol. She wasn't the warm, cookie-baking kind of mother. She was the kind who checked your tire pressure for a road trip. Practical love. 0 speeches. Her job was reading the fine print other people were too excited to read. Young couples, small business owners, families who didn't want to hear the word denied. Her one rule, repeated my whole childhood like a house prayer, was simple. Read it before you sign it, and if they won't let you read it, that's your answer. We weren't poor, we were careful, and it made me hungry, not for money, but for the thing I saw through other people's windows on the walk home from school.
Whole families at one table. A dad carving a turkey like it was a ceremony. A name everyone in town already knew before you said it. I spent my childhood looking over the fence at other people's castles. It took me 28 years, 2 suitcases, and 1 black Volvo to finally understand which kind of family actually holds up when the weather turns bad. Every town like Westfield has a family like the Whitfields. The brick house with the circular driveway on Elm Ridge Road, the name on the law firm downtown, Whitfield and Cross, 1978, on a plaque outside the country club, on the little brass sign by the library reading room they funded. 3 generations photographed every Thanksgiving in front of the same fireplace for the town paper. Even their golden retriever looked like he'd inherited something. Diane Whitfield chaired the hospital gala committee. Robert Whitfield had his own reserved parking spot at the club. When people in Westfield said that name, their voice did a little bow in the middle of the sentence. I was 13 when I asked my mother over spaghetti at our kitchen table why we couldn't be like the families on Elm Ridge Road. She didn't look up from her plate. "We don't buy names, Marin," she said. "We buy ground." I rolled my eyes, the way 13-year-olds are contractually obligated to. But here's what I didn't have the eyes to see back then. There was no envy in her voice. None. Just something dry and knowing. The same tone she used at work when a client bragged about a deal she'd already read the fine print on. My mother had spent almost 3 decades reading claims, contracts, liens, and lawsuits that crossed her desk from every big name in 3 counties. She knew things about the families of Elm Ridge Road, the way a home inspector knows things about a beautiful house, from underneath. I never once thought to ask what she knew.
15 more years would pass before I did. By the time I asked, I was standing on a driveway holding everything I owned. I met Grant Whitfield because of a spreadsheet. I run a small accounting practice out of a rented office above a dry cleaner's in Cranford, Doyle Bookkeeping. My name on the glass since I was 23. Whitfield and Cross hired me to untangle their trust account records, and the partner assigned to work with me was the founder's son, 31 years old, sleeves rolled up, self-deprecating in a way nobody with that last name had any real right to be. Grant was, and I want to be fair here because it matters later, genuinely likable. He remembered how I took my coffee by day 2. He did impressions of the senior partners that were kind at the core. When the firm's books embarrassed him, he didn't blame the old bookkeeper. He laughed and said, "We're a 100-year-old firm, Marin. We've had 100 years to develop bad habits." I liked him the way a slow leak becomes a flooded basement, quietly and then all at once. 8 months later, he brought me to Elm Ridge Road to meet his parents. Diane received me in a living room that smelled like lemon polish and old money, and she looked at me the way an appraiser looks at furniture someone claims is an antique. Slow scan, joint by joint, checking for glue. Her first question wasn't what I did or how we met. She tilted her head, smiled with only the front half of her face, and said, "Doyle. Now, whose people are the Doyles?" I told her my mother worked in insurance, and my people were mostly just my mother. Something flickered behind Diane's eyes and filed itself away. I thought it was disappointment. It took me 5 years to learn it might have been arithmetic. We married the fall I turned 26, at the club, under a tent Diane selected, beside flowers Diane approved, in front of 200 guests of whom I could name maybe 30. I'd wanted something small at the shore. I lost that negotiation so early I'm not sure it was ever officially opened. The town expects certain things from this family, Diane told me, patting my hand like a gavel. The one fight I won quietly at the county clerk's office. I kept my name, Marin Doyle. When Diane found out, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Whitfield wives take the name," she said. "It's an honor other women have been grateful for." My mother, standing nearby in her one good dress, said nothing, but her eyebrow delivered a full paragraph. Grant did what I'd spend the next 4 years watching him do, step into the middle with his hands up, charming in both directions at once. "Mom, it's her name. Mom means well." A sentence for each of us. Nobody defended. Everybody was managed. I filed it under wedding stress. The plan was to live at Elm Ridge Road for a year, maybe 2, save up, then buy our own place. The guest suite has its own bathroom. It's basically an apartment. Basically. You can hear the word I should have questioned. We moved in with my office plants and his law school textbooks, and for 2 weeks it was a soft landing. Big kitchen, backyard, Sunday dinners with cloth napkins. Then, on a Tuesday, Diane knocked on our door holding a leather ledger, and I got introduced to the household accounting. "Every couple under this roof contributes," she explained warmly, like you'd explain gravity. Our share came to $900 a month toward the household, recorded in her book with everyone's initials in a column like a boarding house from 1920. Then, almost as an afterthought, delivered as a compliment, "Grant tells me you're wonderful with numbers. The family finances are a mess, dear. It would mean so much." Meaning I'd also be doing the Whitfield household books for free. I felt chosen, useful. The girl from the rented duplex handed the keys to the ledger of the castle. I said yes before Grant even looked up at his phone. $900 a month for the privilege of free bookkeeping for people whose name was on a law firm. My mother would have read that arrangement twice and slid it back across the counter. I signed it with a smile. Nobody handed me anything to actually read. That turned out to be the whole design. Here's what you learn when a 100-year-old name hands you its checkbook. Names don't cash. I had the Whitfield household finances balanced within a month, and what they balanced to was a slow, elegant leak. Transfers from the firm to the family had been thinning for a decade.
The club dues, the gala tables, the landscaping crew, the wine deliveries, none of it had thinned at all. The house consumed like it was still 1995. The income arrived like a law firm losing clients to bigger firms downtown, because it was. I did what I do for every client bleeding quietly. I built a gentle proposal, trim the landscaping, rebid the insurance, pause one club membership Robert hadn't used in 2 years. I presented it after Sunday dinner in the soft voice I use on proud old business owners. Diane listened the way a queen listens to weather she has no intention of experiencing, then folded her hands and ended the meeting with the house motto, "This family does not live like accountants."
Dear. Fine. But one line in those books wouldn't leave me alone. Every month, $1,100 went out to something called Ridgeline Capital Partners. Autopay, memo line blank, going back years. No file, no folder, no explanation anywhere in the drawer of documents Diane had handed me. It wasn't insurance. It wasn't the firm. When I asked Diane, she said, "Robert handles that," in the same tone as the motto. When I asked Robert, he turned up the volume on the Golf Channel and asked if I'd ever seen a swing like that. I let it go. Write that down somewhere. I let it go. At the back of the Whitfield property, past the pool house, there's a 2-story carriage garage. Brick, slate roof, gorgeous bones, abandoned to boxes and mice since sometime in the Reagan administration. The first time I walked through it, I did the dangerous thing a hungry heart does in a beautiful ruin. I furnished it in my head, and Diane, who missed nothing, watched me do it. That winter, over dessert, she made the offer, with Grant nodding beside her like a notary. "Fix it up, you two. That's your place. Every young Whitfield couple needs a start, and heaven knows we're not using it. A house on the family land. Ours." The girl from the duplex actually teared up at the table, which I'm sure was noted somewhere in Diane's mental ledger. But I'm still my mother's daughter, so the next morning I asked, as lightly as I could, whether we might put something in writing. Nothing dramatic, just a lease, a life estate, anything with ink on it. Diane looked at me with gentle, wounded amusement, the expression you'd give a child who asked you to sign a paper for a hug. "Family doesn't do paperwork, dear." I asked Grant privately to press. He kissed my forehead and said the 11 words I'd hear in my sleep for years. "It's my parents, Marin. I promise you, you can trust me." So here's what I did, and thank God for the habit. I said, "Okay." I opened my savings, $41,000, every dollar earned one client ledger at a time, and I hired the contractor myself. And I kept every receipt, every invoice, every transfer, every check in a green folder in my office drawer. You'll see why that matters. The renovation took most of a year. I chose the door hardware myself, real brass, warm in the hand. I stood in the gutted kitchen arguing happily with the contractor, a patient man named Ray, about where a window should go. Grant came out on weekends, swung a hammer for an hour, and got photographed doing it. I came out every day I could and got sawdust in my hair. On Sunday dinners, Diane began mentioning me almost fondly, which should have been my first warning, because her fondness always arrived with a price tag attached. One night, passing the potatoes, she surveyed the table and said, "You know what I appreciate about Marin? She contributes. Everyone under this roof earns their keep." Heads nodded around the china like it was scripture. Robert said, "Hear, hear." Grant winked at me. "That's Mom for you." And I sat there feeling proud. God help me. Earning my keep, as if that sentence were a compliment and not a receipt. That Christmas, the 3-generation photo in front of the fireplace happened the same as always. Diane center, Robert's hand on her shoulder, Grant behind them. I took the picture. I remember thinking, next year I'll be in it. Hold that thought. It expires in about 8 months. By late winter, the carriage garage had drywall, plumbing, and my whole heart in it. Ray was down to trim and paint.
Grant and I stood in the empty upstairs bedroom one Saturday, light coming through the window I'd fought for, and he put his chin on my head and said, "Crib goes there." 2 days earlier, in the bathroom of our guest suite apartment, I'd watched 2 pink lines appear on a test. We told the family on Sunday dinner. I'll describe Diane receiving the news because it happened in 2 distinct movements, like a short piece of music. Movement 1, genuine delight. She clapped her hands once, actually glowed, said, "A Whitfield baby." For 4 full seconds, I saw the woman Grant swore existed underneath the gala committee chair. Movement 2, arriving before the pie was even cut, recalibration. "Now," she said, folding her napkin, "how are you planning to manage your little business? Clients can be so demanding, and you'll be needed at home." Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "Have you told your mother?" "What do your months look like?" Which, translated from Diane, means, "What does your income look like?" I said work was flexible. She smiled and said, "Of course, dear," and wrote nothing down, because the ledger in her head never needed paper. I didn't know it yet, but somewhere in that pause between the clap and the napkin, my file in that house had moved from asset to liability, pending review. At 26 weeks, I started bleeding on a Tuesday morning and spent the night in a hospital bed in Morristown, listening to my daughter's heartbeat gallop on a monitor. The diagnosis had a long medical name. The prescription was plain English: modified bed rest until delivery. No commuting to clients, no lifting. Stress, the doctor said, looking at me the way doctors look when they mean it. Not optional, medical. Grant held my hand and said all the right things in the room. My mother drove down before dawn and left almost nothing, which from Carol is devotion, and left a cooler of labeled meals in my fridge by day of the week. My income dropped through the floor. I kept 4 clients I could serve from a laptop in bed. I lost 11. The first of the month came, and for the first time in 3 years, I could only put $600 into the household envelope instead of $900. I wrote a note explaining, promised to catch up, and slid it under Diane's ledger like a kid leaving an apology on a teacher's desk. Nothing was said. That's the part people don't understand about houses like that. Nothing is ever said out loud. Instead, 2 mornings later, the ledger appeared on my breakfast tray, open to the contributions page, my initials at the top of a column, and next to that month's number, in Diane's fountain pen, a small, neat red circle. That was all. A red circle delivered with toast. "I'll cover it," Grant said. "Don't stress. You heard the doctor." And then his next paycheck from the firm came up short because the firm's a little tight right now, he said, rubbing his neck. The firm was tight. File that next to Ridgeline Capital Partners, $1,100 a month, memo line blank. Here's how a house disappears. By degrees. Politely. At dinner. I was allowed downstairs for meals my 3rd trimester and sat at that table like a chair that talked. Conversation flowed around me. If I mentioned the nursery, the subject changed within 2 sentences. Diane developed a rotation of stories that had the same moral, delivered to the table at large while looking at no one, which meant me. When I was carrying Grant, I hosted 40 people for Robert's parents' anniversary, on my feet the entire evening. The women in this family have never been delicate. Robert nodded at his soup, and Grant, I want to be precise about Grant, because he's not a villain, he's something that costs you more slowly. Grant got quiet, not cold, quiet. He'd squeeze my knee under the table, a private telegram, "Sorry, you know how she is," and say nothing above the tablecloth. A squeeze under a table is what surrender feels like when it still loves you. So what I did, what my mother's daughter does when the ground goes soft, I kept books of my own, a plain notebook in my nightstand drawer, every household payment I'd ever made, dated, every carriage garage invoice cross-referenced to the green folder in my office drawer, $41,000 in renovations, $36,000 in household contributions over 3 years. I want that understood. There was no strategy, just a bookkeeper laying sandbags out of habit, 1 page at a time, the way some women pray. Then, one night, passing the study door in my slow lap of the hallway, I heard Diane on the phone, her voice low and vicious in the way the gala committee never got to hear. I understand the situation, but this household cannot carry a mouth that doesn't work. I stood in that hallway with my hand on my belly and made myself believe she meant an employee, a vendor, anyone but me. At 8 months pregnant on doctor-ordered calm, you ration what you're able to know. The carriage garage was finished. Ray walked me through it on a video call. Brass hardware warm in the afternoon light, my window exactly where I'd fought for. I proposed the obvious. We'd move in before the baby came. And the stalling began, so smooth it took me 2 weeks to recognize it. After the final inspection, dear. There was no inspection. I'd hired the contractor. The insurance needs sorting first. I offered to sort it. I was reminded rest was medical. After the baby comes, we'll see. Then, one afternoon, from the guest suite window, I watched 2 men in polo shirts carry folding tables, gala banners, and 40 boxes of hospital committee archives across the yard and into my carriage garage, my kitchen, my brass, my window, stacked exactly where the crib was supposed to go.
Junie came in October, 3 days after her due date, 7 pounds even, with a cry like a fire alarm, and my mother's stubborn chin, paperback between contractions like a woman guarding a border, because that's exactly what she was doing. Grant arrived at hour 10, apologizing, hair wild, an emergency meeting at the firm he'd explain later, and even through the fog, I remember thinking, there's that word again, meeting. Then Junie was here, and the world narrowed down to 7 pounds of it, and I forgave everything on general principle. They put her on my chest, and I understood in 1 second flat every unreasonable thing my mother had ever done. Diane visited that evening, 10 minutes by the clock on the wall, pearls on, of course. She looked into the bassinet at her first grandchild and said, verbatim, I've replayed it enough to certify the transcript, a girl, in the tone you'd use finding out the restaurant ran out of the fish. Then she straightened the flowers my mother had brought, mentioned the house would be busy with the gala committee that weekend, and left a gift bag containing a silver frame, empty, for the christening portrait. Sit with that. It's the most honest thing she ever gave me. That night, my mother folded herself into the vinyl recliner and, apropos of nothing, in the gark, said, when they discharge you, you'll go back to that house. If anything happens, anything, you call me before you argue with anyone. Promise me. I laughed. She didn't. Promise me, Marin. I promised. I didn't ask why. She'd have told me, and I don't think I was ready to hear it yet. I think she knew both of those things. They kept us overnight one night, routine, me learning to nurse at 3 a.m. in that particular hospital silence that feels like the inside of a held breath. Grant visited once for an hour, taking calls in the hallway. Through the door, I caught fragments in his low, careful voice. Numbers, dates. We just need until spring. Tell them we're good for it. When he came back in, I asked flat out, no diplomacy. Grant, is something wrong with money? My husband looked at his wife in a hospital gown, holding his day-old daughter, and performed his mother's smile. Nothing you need to worry about. Just rest. I want to flag that sentence for every woman listening. Nothing you need to worry about is not reassurance. It's a door closing softly with you on the outside of your own life. Discharge came on a bright Thursday. Grant was supposed to drive us home at 10. At 9:40, he texted, firm crisis, can't leave, so sorry, take a cab, celebrate tonight. My mother was at work. I told her not to leave early. We were fine. It's a 10-minute ride.
I strapped my daughter's carrier into a taxi that smelled like pine air freshener, and I actually said to the driver, "Elm Ridge Road, the brick one with the circular drive." Proud of it. 3 years of tuition into that name, and I still flashed it like a key card. The cab pulled away and left us on the driveway, and I stood there a second, adjusting the carrier, looking up at the house. Every window closed. On the front steps, in the shade, sat 2 suitcases. You know a suitcase's silhouette the way you know your own handwriting. Those were mine. My winter coat folded on top in a neat square. In October. Somebody had packed for a season I wouldn't be there for. I carried my daughter up those steps on legs I couldn't feel and tried my key in the front door. It went in half an inch and stopped. New lock. The brass plate still bright from the locksmith's screwdriver. I rang the bell of the house I'd lived in for 3 years, holding a baby born into its name the day before, standing next to my own packed luggage. Footsteps. The door opened 4 inches and stopped on the chain. In the gap, Diane, pearls on at 10 in the morning, face arranged like a form letter. Marin. Not dear. My name served cold. Grant needs a clean start, and this household needs contributors. You've been a lovely guest, but guests don't stay forever. Guest. 3 years, $77,000 and 1 grandchild, and I had made guest. Diane, I live here. We'll sort this out when Grant gets home. He's at the firm. She tilted her head. Who do you think packed the suitcases, dear? Dear was back for that one. It had to be. Then, in the calm budget committee voice of a woman reading a line item she'd already decided to cut, every person under this roof earns their place. You've had a difficult year, and we're all sympathetic, but sympathy isn't a line of credit. There's no room in this house for a wife who can't hold her weight. The door closed, not slammed, closed with a click, which is worse. Slamming is at least a conversation. I stood on the finest driveway in Westfield, holding a day-old baby next to a winter coat folded for a winter I wouldn't be spending there. And above me, I heard it, the soft complaint of an old window frame, 2nd floor, the guest suite. I stepped back and looked up, and there was Grant, my husband, Junie's father, firm crisis and all, standing behind the glass with his arms crossed, close enough to have heard everything through a window he did not open. We looked at each other for 3 full seconds. He looked away first. So I kept my promise. I didn't knock again. I sat down on the bigger suitcase, got out my phone, and called my mother. Mom, it happened. The thing you made me promise about. 4 seconds of silence. Then her voice, so level it scared me more than shouting would have. As the baby safe? Are you sitting down? 20 minutes. Click. No questions about what or why, as if she'd been waiting 3 years with her coat already on. 20 minutes later, a black Volvo came around the corner 5 miles faster than my mother has ever driven in her life. She got out with a manila folder under her arm and a silver-haired man I'd never seen carrying a briefcase behind her. "Baby first," she said, and held Junie for 10 full seconds with her eyes closed, like drinking water after a long shift. Then she nodded at the man. "Marin, this is Arthur Pell. He's been my attorney for 9 years. Get in the car. I don't do business on other people's driveways." Around the corner, under a maple on Concord Street, engine off, she opened that folder on the center console and turned my understanding of Elm Ridge Road upside down like an hourglass. The letterhead read Ridgeline Capital Partners, LLC. Ridgeline, that's the $1,100 a month, memo line blank, going out for years. My mother said, "The servicing company collects it. The note behind it is mine. I do this for a living, so I didn't need the lawyer's translation, but I'll give you mine anyway. The Whitefield house, the brick, the circular drive, the locked door, carried a private mortgage, not from a bank. Banks had said no years earlier, from a private lender, through a broker, and private notes get bought and sold like used furniture. 4 years ago, the note secured by the finest address in Westfield had been quietly purchased by a one-woman LLC registered out of a rented duplex in Elizabeth, New Jersey. "You hold their house," I said. "I hold the debt sitting on their house. Different thing." Arthur, from the back seat, dry as an audit. "As of last week, the Whitefields are $9,800 behind, which, frankly, is nothing new." My mother had seen the Whitefield file cross her desk more than once in 30 years, a refinance, then another, each one a little more creative than the last. Names age like roofs, honey. From the street, you can't tell. From the paperwork, you can. 4 years ago, a broker's notice crossed her desk, "Private note for sale, performing, well secured, local," and she recognized the address before she finished the first line. She cashed out a retirement CD and bought it. "Because my daughter was going to be living under that roof," she said, "and I'd already read what was holding it up. You buy the field between your house and a wildfire, Marin. That's all this ever was." She never told me, because if I'd known, I couldn't have lived there honest, and if they'd known, I'd have paid for it in 100 small ways. So the LLC stayed quiet, and this morning Diane solved her own problem for her. She turned the key, she said. "Buckle up, we're going home to feed the baby, then you're going to tell me what you want."